think of the Transfiguration as a prequel to Lent. I don't know about you, but I grew up with sequels, not prequels. No, there was Star Wars, right? We just called it Star Wars. Yeah? How many of you remember when Star Wars came out in the theaters? Yeah? Known to the faithful as A New Hope. Okay. And then there was the next episode, the sequel to Star Wars, which was, anybody? No, not quite. The Empire Strikes Back. Everyone always forgets Empire, but it's the best of the three. Come on. Really, it's the one in the middle. And then the third one is Return of the Jedi. Yes, you've got that. But then I remember, as a little kid even, being with my cousins in Arcadia, down in Florida. Didn't get to go see them very often, even though we lived in the same state. And so to get to see the cousins was a treat. My cousin David was a couple years older than me. And, when you're a boy of that age, you look up to someone who's older. And he had Star Wars toys. He also had Battlestar Galactica toys, but I had never seen that, so it didn't mean as much. But they were spaceships, so they were cool. And we played with them interchangeably almost. I know that upsets some purists out there, I'm sure, but still. He pointed out to me Star Wars was actually episode 4. And that Empire Strikes Back was 5, and that Jedi was 6. That there were 3 whole movies that they never made. Wow. That's pretty neat. And then when they came out, they actually made those movies, much to the dismay of many purists who said, what are these things they're making? No, and they turned out okay, except for the whole Misa think this is crazy Jar Jar Binks character that no one likes. If you're not with me anymore, don't worry. It's not crucial to the message. It's a prequel. Something that comes out before you need to know something's coming out. This is a prequel to Lent. Lent for us is a season in the church when we look forward to the crucifixion and resurrection, but we know that it's Jesus' journey to the cross. We know that there's Maundy Thursday and Good Friday. We know that that's not going to be enjoyable for Jesus or for us. At least you better not enjoy Maundy Thursday and Good Friday. Beat yourself appropriately. Come on. You get the idea. But don't worry. It may be Friday, but Sunday's coming. All right, we know that Easter is the goal of the journey, the resurrection, the good news. You can't have that without the crucifixion and the journey to Jerusalem. So this sets us up for that in a strange way. You might think of the Passion story as the story. And if all you had of a Bible was the story of Jesus' death and resurrection, that would be pretty good. I mean, you'd have the core of the gospel. You'd have the nugget of truth that you need to sustain you. What about the other parts? Well, of course, they're not just secondary. They lead to that moment. I've said to my confirmands and to you before, you put on Jesus glasses when you read the Old Testament, and you can see how God wove salvation into the story of the people of Israel and led that up to Jesus. So this, in a way, is a prequel in that it ties into some of those earlier characters. The reason why I thought of a Star Wars reference, well, there's that beautiful moment at the end of Return of the Jedi where everybody's partying because the bad guys have been defeated. But those who had died before appear in ghostly form around the campfire, looking on approvingly, knowing that their work was not in vain. Oh, okay. So it's science fiction. Go with me on this. Here, this is really what happened. Elijah and Moses show up on the mountain. The Bible is full of all kinds of amazing events. We might consider them supernatural. This certainly qualifies. Elijah got carried up into heaven. Moses is long dead. And now they appear on the mountaintop. And not only that, Jesus himself had been transfigured. He was glowing. Jesus takes 3 of his friends to the mountaintop, becomes transfigured, his clothes become dazzling white, Then, to top it all off, these dead guys show up. Elijah and, dead Moses, perhaps, but Elijah, well, we saw what happened to him. Cue the Vangelis music. Here comes the chariots of fire, carrying him on up into... Did the chariot of fire carry him into heaven? Look closely. Bible trivia time. A chariot of fire and horses separated the two of them, and Elijah ascended on a whirlwind. Who was it that lassoed the tornado? Remember that from your folk history? Pecos Bill. That's right. Yeah, Pecos Bill. Oh, yeah, I'd forgotten that. Yeah, he's up there with those great folk heroes like Paul Bunyan. We have larger-than-life heroes in our own history, even here in America. Who chopped down the cherry tree and said, "I cannot tell a lie"? It was that Abe Lincoln. He just had his birthday. It was that Abraham Washington guy, Thomas Lincoln and Michael Jefferson, Or was it George Jefferson? George Jefferson, he was one of our presidents. Yeah. Wheezy, get me the Constitution. Sorry, never mind. All kinds of pop culture this morning. I hadn't planned on going there. We have our folk heroes. We have our famous legendary figures that seem larger than life. Pecos Bill, lassoed the whirlwind. Well, here we have Elijah ascending in the whirlwind. And not only that, before that he had rolled up his mantle, Babe the Blue Ox, carved out the Grand Canyon, smacked the waters, and they parted. These are historic figures that are larger than life. And we know the stories of Moses. We know that Moses did amazing things through the power of God with Aaron and the people of Israel, through the wilderness to the promised land. So it was one of those amazing things that got him into trouble, striking the rock when God had not commanded it. Still, simply amazing. So these legendary figures appear. Jesus is transfigured. Elijah and Moses were talking with Jesus. What do we do? Well, Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. That's the understatement of the day. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. I don't want to focus on the coming up short nature of this. Because again, we're talking about this story as something that's a prequel to Lent, something that's preparing us for the Passion story, something that's getting us ready for the direction that Jesus is going. Part of living in the present is understanding our connection to our past and how it's going to shape our future. Where have you come from? Let me ask it in a very church-specific way. Who are the folks in your past? Who are the people, legendary or otherwise, that shaped your faith? Was it a pastor? Was it a Sunday school teacher? Was it a parent? Was it a friend? Maybe a surrogate parent or a grandparent? Was it someone that touched you deeply and profoundly, far-reaching way? I've told you before about Eleanor Jacobson. She was one of those folks for me. She was a Sunday school teacher. Dear little Scandinavian woman who was very soft-spoken, but knew her Bible, let me tell you what, and had a lot of patience for very active kiddos. I remember as a child, she had been a wonderful Sunday school teacher, and then as I got into college and had heard the call to ministry, came back to my home congregation and spent a summer working with my pastor, doing a little bit of what he did. He said, well, if you're going to go to seminary, let's give you a jump start on things. You can experience what it's like to work in a parish, do some of the same things that I do. So I went out to see Miss Eleanor. By this point, she was no longer living in her own home. She was in a care center. And I went to see her, and of course she had items of great value to her. She began to tell me about those things. One of them was a picture of her and her husband on their wedding day. Here she was in this beautiful long satin gown. There he was in a tuxedo that was like a conductor's tuxedo. It had a high waist, but big long tails. They were a handsome couple. And she looked fondly at that picture and she said, he was a big old Swede. I'll never forget that. More than that, I'll never forget the time and care she spent on me and the other kids at the church where I grew up. That makes a difference in your life later on, to know that someone cared enough, someone who wasn't your family, someone who just felt like it was her joy and delight, her duty, and her call to work with kids. Who shaped your faith? Who can you point to? If you had to be on a mountaintop with two other people from the past, who would they be? Or let me ask it a different way. When I interviewed to work as a barista at Starbucks, they asked the small group of us in the training session, if you could sit down over coffee with one person, who would it be? And of course, by this point I'm thinking, well, Jesus. But then I think, no, I sit down with him over coffee regularly anyway. I'll think of an earthly person. Because sure enough, someone else on our group said, I'd sit down with my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And I thought, yeah, awesome. To tell you the truth, I don't remember who I said in that interview. But let me pose the question to you. If there were two other people besides Jesus that you could sit down with over coffee, who would they be? Would it be Moses and Elijah? Are they figures from this century, from sometime in the past? How has your past shaped your present? How have the people in your past shaped your present? Let me ask it a third way. How have the people in this congregation shaped its present? Those who are no longer with us. I hear stories about some of your parents, some of your friends who are no longer with us, folks that I did not get to know because they had died before I got here. But they still live on through the good seeds they planted, the ministries that continue. So who do you know that's no longer with us? Shaped us. Shaped a congregation. Forged a place. So many stories that I've heard. Those who are involved in the many ministries, some which are continuing and some which are not. But still, seeds that have been planted that bore fruit that helps us continue. Get the idea. Our faith has a past, and it helps us in our present, but also steers us towards our future. Here we have references to the past on the Mountain of Transfiguration. We have Moses and Elijah. We know Elijah the prophet and Moses the leader. You can read their stories in the Old Testament. But it bears asking, what do they have to do with Jesus? Why those two? Are those the two that Jesus requested? God bring them there. What did they say to one another? They were talking with each other. Was it like a dugout conversation with a pitcher before he goes out to finish the game? Was it like a quarterback huddle, gathered around, setting up the play, calling the play before they approach the line? I mean, in a way, that's very apropos. Was it like that moment before the back of the plane opens and everybody jumps out? The field of battle below. I think it's akin to one of those. The plan is made. That's my guess. I mean, none of us really know what they were talking about, but if I had to guess, it had to do something with what's coming in Jesus' future. It had to do with what is coming yet. Then we get the voice from the cloud. Oh, I haven't forgotten that. Peter sort of blabbers about, let's make these booths. The cloud comes down, and from the cloud comes a voice. This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him. And then, as usually happens in the Gospel of Mark, suddenly or immediately, they look around, saw no one with them anymore but only Jesus. You had a transfiguration moment in your past in which the voice of God says, well, I don't dare presume what God said to you. It's your relationship with God, yes? Heard that voice? For me, it was, I want you to preach for me. In one moment, I've heard other voices in my head. For the most part, I think those times were also God, but my shrink seems to think otherwise. No, I'm kidding. Whether you've audibly heard the words of God spoken to you or not matters less. Whether you are convinced that you've got God moving your life in a direction is more important. What has God said to you that has shaped where you are today and where you're going to be in the future? Well, how can we know? How can we know what awaits us in the future? Well, you've seen episodes 4, 5, and 6, right? I mean, going back to watch 1, 2, and 3 later, what good is that? It's kind of like starting with the New Testament, reading it, and someone saying, did you know there was an Old Testament? No, I've never even heard of that. I was at this event, and this guy handed me a New Testament, and I read it. You mean there's a whole other part of the Bible? Yeah. 27 books in that one, 36 in the other. You've got a lot of reading to catch up on. Get started. Wow. There's a whole prequel to this thing. Do you mean to really tell me that if all you had was the New Testament and someone said, here's an Old Testament, you wouldn't read it? Of course. I want to know more about this God. I want to know more about the Lord and how God has shaped history. Of course we would. But it's not just interested in it. I'm not just interested in it. I hope you aren't either. Just as a historical document, just as something that tells us about the past, but something that informs our present and shapes us for the future. Finally, we're left with this enigmatic statement from Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. And there's your prequel line. Taken as it is, why, we can speculate about what they talked about. We can wonder why he was transfigured. I mean, we can look at any of those things and come up with some pretty good answers, probably. But here's the kicker. Tell no one about this until after the resurrection. There is an end point. There is a goal. There is a moment for which Jesus is being prepared. And this story on the Transfiguration is somehow part of it. But it's not going to really make sense to them until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. If even then. What does it mean to you? Are there moments in your life that shaped you, brought you to where you are today, that you have no idea what they mean yet? I told you when I was in Longview, I had that sign where I was driving around and I saw 3 black dogs, not all together, but 1, 2, 3. I still don't know what that meant. Maybe I'm just reading into it. Maybe it's a sign that hasn't played out yet. You get the idea. Now, apparently they're making an episode 7. They're making, 3 more Star Wars movies? And the guy who's directing them, well, I'm not really sure I'm going to enjoy it. We'll see. I'll probably watch them anyway because that's a good story. I like that universe that they've created. I enjoy the themes and ideas and the characters, the lightsaber fights and all that. Yeah. Our story isn't done yet, though. God is certainly not done with us. And whether we know how to interpret the events of the past that tell us about the future or not, we have the sure and certain hope that God has not abandoned us. And that even though Jesus died and was raised and lived with the disciples for a while before his ascension, he sent his Spirit to comfort us, to teach us, to to lead us into all truth. We can trust in God to hold our future in His hand.